It all started with a whisper in the halls of Buckingham Palace. A single sentence, yet it carried the weight of centuries. "He's a fool to think I will forgive him." Those words, uttered by King Charles himself, were more than an expression of anger. They were a declaration, a final, irrevocable line in a family feud that had simmered for decades. And the target of this royal ire? His own son, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. Imagine being Harry in that moment. Imagine the walls of the palace closing in, the ornate chandeliers casting long shadows over a path that once seemed certain. A path where you were the son, the heir, the future of a monarchy steeped in tradition. But now, that path was severed, the road ahead uncertain. The family you once trusted suddenly transformed into adversaries. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The decree came quietly, almost invisibly. Signed in secrecy, circulated among a select few, whispered in the ears of advisors sworn to loyalty, yet never revealed to the public. Harry had no warning. He was blindsided, caught in a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't have prepared for. And what did Charles do next? He stripped Harry of every single royal patronage. Military appointments? Gone. Charitable roles? Gone. Ceremonial responsibilities? Gone. Every thread connecting Harry to the crown was severed. You might be wondering, why now? Why this dramatic, unprecedented move? The answer lies in a series of betrayals, public humiliations, and personal affronts that Charles simply could no longer tolerate. For years, Harry and Meghan had been in the headlines. Every controversy magnified, every private moment dissected, every decision questioned. From televised interviews that aired family secrets to unauthorized biographies, the Sussexes' actions had become a thorn in the side of the monarchy. And Charles? He had reached his breaking point. But this isn't just about anger or revenge. It's about control, legacy, and the preservation of a monarchy under intense scrutiny. Charles isn't just thinking about today, he's thinking about the future. He's thinking about how history will remember him, about how every action he takes will reverberate through generations. And in his eyes, Harry's actions were not just personal betrayals. They were threats to the very fabric of the institution he has spent a lifetime upholding. The world doesn't see the palace behind closed doors. They don't see the tense meetings, the hushed conversations, the advisors pacing in royal corridors, debating what can be done and what must be done. They don't see the private letters, carefully drafted to convey authority, disappointment, and warning. They don't see Harry reading those letters, feeling the cold grip of inevitability tightening around him. And that's the drama. The private storm that will inevitably spill into public view. Consider the implications. Removing a royal from the line of succession is not just symbolic. It's seismic. Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet, are now cast into uncertainty. Their place in history, once seemingly secure, is now in question. Imagine being a parent in that situation, knowing that your child's future has been rewritten by a decree you had no power to stop. The emotional toll is immeasurable. And yet, Charles's move isn't just punitive, it's strategic. Every military title Harry held, every patronage, every ceremonial duty was stripped in one decisive act. He is, in effect, severing Harry's ability to act as a representative of the crown. Every time Harry steps into public life, he is now a reminder of what has been lost, what has been severed, what no longer belongs to him. For Charles, this is not merely punishment, it is restoration of order. But let's step back for a moment. Think about the family dynamics here. William, the elder son, now watches as his younger brother is cut off in the harshest terms possible. And Edward and other close relatives are caught in the tension, balancing personal loyalties with public duty. Every conversation in those gilded corridors carries weight. Every glance is loaded with meaning. And for the advisors, this is a minefield. One wrong move, one leaked word, could turn this internal family crisis into a global scandal. You might ask, how did we get here? After all, Harry and Charles were once close. There were moments of understanding, of connection, of shared experience. But cracks appeared, small at first, then widening into chasms. Televised interviews that aired private grievances, books and documentaries revealing family secrets, and public appearances that seemed calculated to challenge the monarchy. All these were pieces in a larger puzzle. Charles's patience eroded slowly, methodically, until it finally snapped. And the timing is no accident. Recent events have set the stage. The growing tension between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family, the press's insatiable appetite for scandal, and public opinion swinging unpredictably. Charles is acutely aware that the monarchy is under scrutiny like never before. Every decision, every word, every action is magnified. In this context, allowing Harry to continue as he has, unchecked, independent, and defiant, was no longer tenable. What's even more shocking is the way this decree was executed. There were no public announcements, no grand ceremonies. It was a quiet, lethal maneuver, delivered in writing, sealed with authority, and backed by centuries of royal protocol. Those who witnessed it describe a hush descending upon the palace, a silence so heavy, it felt almost tangible. The gravity of the act settled in every corner, in every corridor, in every room where decisions were made. And Harry? He was left to confront a reality he could not escape. Calls from advisors, lawyers, and confidants poured in, each one a reminder that the life he knew had been fundamentally altered. For a man accustomed to navigating public life with charm and agility, this was different. This was permanent. This was a point of no return. You may wonder, could Harry have anticipated this? Perhaps in whispers, in rumors, in fleeting hints. But nothing prepares you for the cold finality of a king's word. Nothing prepares you for the moment when the crown itself, in its authority and majesty, turns its back on you. And in that moment, every decision Harry had made, every word spoken in interviews, every move that was meant to assert independence, suddenly took on a new weight. They were no longer just choices, they were liabilities. And yet, even in this storm, there are glimpses of human complexity. Charles, in his sternness, is also acting as a father, albeit in a manner only he can understand. He believes he is protecting the monarchy, protecting his family, even if it means breaking one's son in the process. There is irony here, too. The very son he sought to protect with the monarchy's reputation is the one he now punishes to safeguard that same institution. But the story does not end here. This is only the beginning of a chain reaction that will ripple through the royal family, the media, and the public. Advisors are scrambling to anticipate next steps. William is weighing how to act without alienating either side. Meghan is navigating a path fraught with public and private peril. And Harry, well, Harry must now confront a future where every step is scrutinized, every move potentially fatal to his remaining reputation and legacy. The question now, for all of us watching, is simple. What happens next? Can Harry recover from this? Can he redefine himself outside the monarchy? Or is this the final chapter in a relationship that has shaped modern royal history? And what does this mean for the monarchy itself, its stability, its image, its future? In the first moments after the decree, the palace was silent. But outside, the world was about to erupt. Headlines would fly, social media would ignite, and every detail, every nuance, every hidden truth would be dissected in real time. The stakes are high. The consequences are enormous. And the fallout? It will be felt for years, perhaps decades. And as we begin this journey into the heart of royal turmoil, one thing is certain. The events you are about to witness are unprecedented, dramatic, and deeply personal. King Charles has drawn a line, and Harry has crossed it. But the most shocking revelations, the secrets, the betrayals, the hidden documents, are still to come. And one of them, in particular, will change everything. Did he really just do that? That question echoed through Buckingham Palace in whispers, reverberating off the gilded walls like a warning. The breaking point had come, and no one could ignore it. Not the advisors, not the courtiers, not even William, who had long sensed the storm brewing but never imagined it would strike this hard. King Charles had made his move. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, was no longer just a controversial figure in the royal family. He had been cut off entirely, stripped of titles, privileges, and patronages, and removed from the line of succession permanently. But before we get to the full scope of what happened, we need to understand how it got to this point. How did a son who once delighted in royal tradition, who once stood proudly alongside his family at public events, reach a moment where his own father deemed him too much of a threat to the crown to be forgiven. It began with a series of choices, decisions that seemed small at the time, but accumulated into a mountain too heavy for Charles to bear. Interviews, media appearances, memoirs. Each one peeling back layers of family privacy, each one revealing private grievances, and each one slowly eroding trust. To Charles, these actions weren't just rebellious, they were betrayals. Consider the infamous Oprah interview. Millions watched as Harry and Meghan laid bare the struggles within the royal family, painting portraits of dysfunction and prejudice. For Charles, the pain was personal. Here was his son, publicly airing grievances that had been discussed behind closed doors, showing vulnerabilities that should have remained private. But worse, the interview contained implications that Charles's leadership was questionable. His ability to guide the monarchy was in doubt. It was a direct challenge, and for a man who has devoted his life to preserving an institution that spans centuries, it was unacceptable. Advisors recalled tense meetings in the aftermath. Papers shuffled across polished oak tables. The Royal Communications Office debated whether damage control was possible or whether this had crossed a line. Charles was unmoved by apologies or pleas. His mind had already made up, his patience exhausted. And there was another layer, the constant press speculation, the tabloids feasting on every perceived slight, every rumored disagreement. Public image mattered. Perception mattered. And Harry's actions threatened not only the stability of the monarchy, but the image of a king who had spent decades preparing for his role. But it wasn't just about the media. Personal betrayals cut deeper. Charles had extended repeated olive branches, meetings, private conversations, letters, each one an attempt to bridge the gap, to mend the fracture. Yet time and again, Harry's responses seemed designed to provoke, to maintain distance, to assert independence in ways that undermined the family. There were moments when advisors worried for Charles's health. Tension of this magnitude, combined with public scrutiny, takes a toll even on the strongest individuals. Charles, in his frustration and anguish, saw only one solution: decisive action. The breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was a culmination, a timeline that reads like a ticking clock counting down to confrontation. First, there was the unauthorized memoir that aired sensitive family details, followed by high-profile public appearances that criticized royal tradition. And then, finally, a series of private but leaked conversations that suggested Harry was plotting moves independent of the family's oversight. To Charles, these weren't just mistakes. They were direct threats to the continuity and integrity of the monarchy. So he acted, quietly, meticulously, with the precision of someone who understood the stakes. Advisors were summoned. Drafts of the royal decree were reviewed. Legal counsel ensured every word had weight, every clause enforceable. This was not an impulsive act of anger. It was strategy, calculated with the cold efficiency of a monarch who understood the power of legacy. And when the decree was finally signed, the message was clear: Harry's future as a representative of the crown was over, permanently. And yet, the palace corridors are a maze of emotion, tension, and uncertainty. While the legal and ceremonial aspects of the decree were clear, the personal impact was immense. Imagine being Harry, suddenly confronted with the permanence of his father's decision. Letters arrive, succinct yet devastating. Calls from lawyers explain what has been stripped, what can never be regained. Patronages, charitable, military, ceremonial, are gone. A son once close to the king now exists outside the structure of the monarchy entirely. William, ever the middle ground, watched with a mixture of horror and resolve. He understood the necessity of family loyalty, but also recognized the peril of unchecked public exposure. There were conversations behind closed doors, arguments muted by protocol, moments of silent reflection as both brothers attempted to navigate a reality that had shifted beneath their feet. And for William, the tension was amplified by his own role as heir. Every move Harry made now had implications for him and the stability of the monarchy. The media, of course, had no idea. From the outside, everything appeared calm, even ceremonial. But inside, the palace was anything but serene. Staff whispered, advisors paced, and courtiers braced themselves for the inevitable fallout. What would the press do when this became public knowledge? What would the public think when they realized that a son had been effectively erased from the line of succession? The potential for scandal was immense, and every insider knew it. And yet, there was a certain poetry to Charles's action. By acting decisively, he asserted control. He drew a line in the sand that separated family loyalty from institutional duty. He reminded everyone, including Harry, that the monarchy's survival and integrity came first, always first. There would be no second chances, no delayed reckoning, no forgiveness offered lightly. To Charles, the crown was eternal, but family bonds, fragile, human, were secondary when tested in this way. Harry, meanwhile, was forced to confront a new reality. Gone were the days of ceremonial appearances, of honorary military titles, of patronages that allowed him to represent causes close to his heart. Each loss carried emotional weight, a symbolic severing of the ties that had bound him to his heritage. And yet, in public, he maintained composure. A smile here, a careful statement there. But inside, the impact was seismic. Friends, confidants, even Meghan sensed the storm that had been unleashed, understanding that this was not simply a professional setback. It was a personal one of the highest magnitude. We must also consider the ripple effect. Patronages that Harry once held are not simply vacant. They are vital roles within the royal framework. Military regiments, charitable organizations, and ceremonial duties now require reassignment. Advisors scramble to determine who can step in without creating controversy, without upsetting established relationships. The domino effect of this decision is enormous, touching lives far beyond the walls of the palace, far beyond the immediate family. And yet, amid the tension, there are questions that demand answers. How will the public respond? Will Harry retaliate publicly? Will Meghan take steps to protect their remaining influence? What are the long-term consequences for the monarchy, the succession, and the global perception of the royal family? Every decision made now carries layers of consequence that will unfold over years, if not decades. But perhaps the most haunting question of all is this: can a family survive such a fracture? When trust is broken at the highest level, when a father publicly, permanently distances himself from his son, can reconciliation ever truly occur? Or is this decree not just a punishment, but a permanent scar in the fabric of the monarchy? As the palace settles into a tense, uneasy quiet, advisors whisper about the next steps. Legal teams prepare statements, communication strategists craft narratives, and courtiers brace themselves for the inevitable public explosion. The world outside has yet to see the storm, but insiders know it is coming. And when it does, no one will be left untouched. And while the palace waits, Harry sits in private reflection, the weight of a severed future pressing down on him. His titles, privileges, and role in the monarchy, all stripped away. And as he contemplates what comes next, he is confronted with an uncomfortable truth. There is no going back. The line has been drawn. The breaking point has passed. And everything that follows will be shaped by this singular, devastating moment. But what happens when a son who has been cut off refuses to remain silent? When someone with global influence, charisma, and a story to tell suddenly has nothing to lose? That is where the real drama begins, and it's closer than anyone could imagine. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be erased? That question haunted the halls of Buckingham Palace, whispered between advisors, courtiers, and even military aides who had served Harry faithfully. Because that's exactly what King Charles had done, erased his son from the line of succession. And he didn't stop there. Every shred of authority, every ceremonial role, every prestigious patronage Harry held was suddenly gone. One signed document, one royal decree, and Harry's royal identity was permanently redefined. The royal decree itself was a work of meticulous, chilling precision. Drafted in secret, reviewed by legal experts, and finally signed by the monarch with a flourish that carried more weight than any ceremonial sword could ever have, it spelled out Harry's fate in language both formal and final. There was no ambiguity, no loopholes, no chance of reinterpretation. In a few carefully chosen sentences, Charles transformed a son into a private citizen, stripping him of titles, privileges, and roles that had once defined his public life. The decree began with the most damning of declarations: Harry's permanent removal from the line of succession. Every word in that sentence resonated across centuries of monarchy. For a family whose history is measured not in months, but in generations, this was seismic. By severing Harry from the succession, Charles didn't just limit a career, he redefined legacy. This was a symbolic act of ultimate authority, a parent imposing boundaries with irreversible consequences. But the decree did not stop there. In subsequent sections, every patronage was addressed: military affiliations, charitable appointments, ceremonial responsibilities. Harry had served as colonel of various regiments, patron of multiple humanitarian organizations, and as a figurehead for initiatives that had benefited from his visibility and influence. Now, all of these were revoked. Letters were sent to organizations, the Royal Communications Office prepared press releases, and advisors coordinated with protocol officers to ensure a smooth, albeit shocking, transition. To understand the gravity of this move, imagine being a military officer suddenly told your commanding officer no longer represents the crown, or a charity receiving notice that its figurehead has been stripped of authority, its funding and outreach dependent on a symbol who no longer exists. That is exactly the upheaval Harry's removal caused, not just for him personally, but for the very institutions he had championed. But let's step back for a moment. How did it feel for Charles to draft this decree? To sign a document that would forever alter the trajectory of his own son? Insiders say the king experienced a mixture of sorrow and resolve. There was sadness, of course, a parent losing connection with a child, but also a profound sense of duty. He saw the monarchy as an institution larger than any one individual, including Harry. And so, he acted not with malice, but with what he believed was necessity. The palace, however, was far from calm. Staffers, courtiers, and advisors debated every line, every clause, every potential fallout. Communications teams rehearsed statements, anticipating the media frenzy that would inevitably follow. Press officers understood the narrative would not be easily contained. Harry was beloved by certain sections of the public. Global audiences were invested in his story. And now, they would witness the unprecedented spectacle of a king formally erasing his son from the line of succession. Yet, for all the logistics and planning, the emotional toll was undeniable. Those closest to the king described tense nights of contemplation, arguments muted by protocol, and moments of private reflection where Charles wrestled with the weight of his own decision. This was not a light decree. It was a decision that would ripple through history. And yet, he never wavered. To him, this was necessary, unavoidable, and final. Meanwhile, word of the decree leaked to Harry through confidential channels before any public announcement. Imagine the moment: receiving legal documents detailing your complete disinheritance, your public role stripped away, your future redefined. The sense of betrayal was immediate, compounded by the understanding that this was not temporary. There would be no return, no reconciliation in the short term, no path back to the privileges that had once been his birthright. Meghan, ever the strategist and protector, immediately mobilized her network. Legal teams were engaged, public relations experts prepared statements, and friends reached out discreetly to gauge the emotional fallout. But even with their support, Harry was forced to confront an unprecedented reality. For the first time in his life, his connection to the monarchy was entirely severed. Publicly, however, he maintained composure. A carefully crafted message was released, expressing gratitude for past support and acknowledging the shift in his status. But behind the scenes, the emotional upheaval was immense. Allies described long nights of private reflection, moments of frustration, and the gnawing feeling of invisibility. For someone whose identity had been intertwined with royal duty, being stripped of every role was a psychological earthquake. And then there were the ramifications for the monarchy itself. Every military unit, every charity, every ceremonial body that Harry had influenced had to be recalibrated. Replacement appointments were made, decisions rushed to avoid disruptions, and staffers worked tirelessly to ensure the transition appeared seamless to the public. But insiders knew the truth. The reverberations would be felt for months, even years. This was not just a familial shift, it was an institutional shockwave. Charles, meanwhile, faced the delicate task of balancing authority with perception. He had acted decisively, but public opinion mattered. Monarchs live in the glare of scrutiny, and the eyes of the world would dissect every word, every nuance of his actions. Advisors coached him on messaging, stressing that the decree needed to be framed as a protective measure for the monarchy, a necessary step to preserve its integrity, rather than an act of personal vengeance. But the drama didn't end there. Questions immediately emerged. What would Harry do next? Would he accept his new reality quietly, or would he retaliate publicly, leveraging media and celebrity influence to challenge his father's decision? Could the monarchy withstand another public confrontation of this magnitude? And most provocatively, had Charles underestimated Harry's resilience and ability to turn public sympathy in his favor? As the palace prepared for the announcement, the tension was almost unbearable. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones about precedent or lack thereof. Advisors debated the timing, the framing, the potential fallout across social media and global press. Every scenario seemed fraught with risk, but Charles remained resolute. The decision had been made. The royal decree had been signed, and Harry's fate as a representative of the monarchy was sealed. Yet, while the legal and ceremonial ramifications were clear, the personal and emotional consequences would continue to unfold in unpredictable ways. Harry was no longer just a prince. He was a private citizen with global influence and a story that could captivate millions. How he chose to wield that influence, how he responded to the erasure of his royal status, would determine the next chapter in this extraordinary saga. And perhaps most importantly, a question lingered in the minds of those who knew both men intimately. Could a father truly sever ties with a son and expect absolute silence? Or would Harry, now unburdened by protocol and hierarchy, find ways to challenge, confront, or expose that which had been hidden for decades? The royal decree had been signed. Its intent was clear, its execution precise, and yet, its repercussions were only beginning to ripple through the palace, the public, and the world at large. The storm was far from over. In fact, in some ways, it had only just begun. Because while a king can dictate titles and privileges, he cannot dictate narrative. And Harry, no longer bound by the structures of monarchy, had a voice, a powerful, global, uncontainable voice. What would he do with it? And how far would Charles go to maintain control over a son who had been rendered, at least officially, powerless? Silence never lasts long in Buckingham Palace. That was the unspoken rule whispered by those who had served the monarchy for decades. And on the morning following the royal decree, silence shattered. Every corridor, every gilded hallway, every echoing staircase seemed to hum with tension, as if the palace itself had sensed the seismic shift that had occurred. Staff whispered behind closed doors, courtiers exchanged nervous glances, and even the portraits of long-departed monarchs seemed to watch the unfolding drama with grave interest. The decree had done more than strip Harry of his titles and privileges. It had sent shockwaves through the palace's intricate ecosystem. Advisors scrambled to handle the aftermath. Military liaisons were contacted to manage the sudden reassignment of regimental roles. Charities scrambled to adjust to the abrupt removal of their royal patron. Ceremonial duties, once smoothly distributed according to decades-old tradition, had to be reorganized with unprecedented speed. The palace, which had long operated like a well-oiled machine, now faced chaos. Staff members, many of whom had served Harry personally for years, were caught in a web of loyalty and uncertainty. Some were devastated, unable to reconcile their affection for the Duke with the reality of his removal. Others were pragmatic, focusing on executing their duties without letting emotions interfere. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Who could be trusted to enforce the king's decree without leaking details to the press? Who would quietly mourn the loss of a prince's presence in daily palace life? These questions circulated through the corridors like a slow-moving storm. Meanwhile, Charles himself remained composed, but the strain was visible. Advisors described long, private hours spent reviewing correspondence, anticipating media fallout, and preparing for questions that would inevitably arrive from every corner of the globe. His decision had been final, but the consequences were unfolding in unpredictable ways. Every aide, every chamberlain, every secretary understood that they were living through history, and history is rarely comfortable. The palace kitchens, often unnoticed in the grand narrative, became a hub of whispered speculation. Chefs who had prepared meals for Harry and Meghan discussed the changes in hushed tones. "Did you hear?" One whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "He's gone. Completely gone." Others shook their heads, uncertain how to respond when approached by visiting dignitaries or journalists. The ripple effect of a single decree had reached every level of the institution, from the highest-ranking advisors to the newest interns. Even William and Kate were swept into the whirlwind. The future king watched his father navigate the aftermath, balancing familial loyalty with the responsibilities of monarchy. Kate, ever the diplomat, provided counsel, emphasizing the need for measured communication and public reassurance. Their private conversations, described as tense but resolute, revolved around a central concern: how to maintain stability while respecting the authority of the king. And yet, the siblings could not ignore a gnawing question: what would Harry do next? Courtiers noted that the traditional order of life within the palace was disrupted. Meetings that once followed a predictable schedule became urgent and unpredictable. The Royal Communications Office worked tirelessly to craft messages that maintained decorum while managing the inevitable media scrutiny. Legal teams reviewed every public statement for potential pitfalls. And somewhere in the background, security personnel adjusted protocols, anticipating the possibility of unforeseen events or public demonstrations. The ripple effects were endless. The emotional atmosphere within the palace was equally intense. For those who had grown up alongside Harry, witnessing his removal felt personal. Friends and colleagues mourned in private, balancing grief with the understanding that their public loyalty remained paramount. Others wrestled with moral dilemmas: how to reconcile personal sympathy for Harry with professional duty to the crown. These conflicts, though quiet, contributed to a palpable tension that seemed to hang in the air. But there was more than just internal unrest. Advisors and courtiers recognized that the external narrative would dominate headlines worldwide. Public opinion, already volatile due to previous controversies, could now swing unpredictably. Social media amplified every detail, every rumor, every speculation. It was a delicate balance: maintain authority, enforce the decree, and navigate the public perception without igniting a full-blown crisis. And then came the whispers of potential retaliation. Insiders speculated that Harry might leverage his global platform to challenge his father publicly. Friends and legal advisors warned of interviews, social media statements, or even memoirs that could counter the king's narrative. The palace, already tense, braced for the possibility of a confrontation that could escalate beyond anyone's control. Every aide understood that they were on the precipice of a historic clash, one that could redefine the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, the staff struggled with personal allegiances. Those who had served Harry loyally for years faced difficult choices: continue their service under the king's orders, or quietly support the former prince in ways that might risk their positions. The human element, the emotional turmoil of palace employees, was often overlooked by public narratives, but insiders knew it could influence outcomes in subtle yet powerful ways. Even routine activities were tinged with unease. Ceremonial rehearsals, state dinners, and formal audiences now carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Every step, every gesture, every bow was scrutinized through the lens of recent events. The palace itself seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the walls themselves understood that tradition had been disrupted and nothing would ever feel quite the same again. And then came the first signs of external response. Media outlets around the world scrambled to confirm details, while royal commentators speculated on the motivations behind Charles's unprecedented action. Headlines ranged from "King cuts off son," a royal rift like no other, to "Harry erased from monarchy," what this means for the future of the crown. Social media exploded with debate, opinions divided between support for Charles's decisive leadership and sympathy for a son who had been publicly severed from his family. Within the palace, advisors debated the timing of public statements, weighing the risks of immediate release against the potential benefits of controlled messaging. Some argued for complete silence, allowing the decree to speak for itself. Others pushed for proactive communication, emphasizing Charles's sense of duty and the necessity of protecting the monarchy. Every decision was fraught with potential consequences, both public and private. As the day unfolded, the ripple effects continued to spread. Departments were reassigned, schedules rewritten, and internal communications updated to reflect the new reality. Yet beneath the surface, uncertainty lingered. The palace, though meticulously organized, had never faced a crisis quite like this. The removal of a son from the line of succession, combined with the revocation of every patronage, created a tension that was both human and institutional. And through it all, one question remained. How would Harry respond? With titles gone, privileges revoked, and public standing in flux, he was no longer bound by royal protocol. Would he retreat quietly into private life, or would he leverage his influence in ways that could challenge the monarchy? The palace waited, anticipating a response that could reshape not only family dynamics, but global perceptions of the crown. The fallout within Buckingham Palace was not just logistical. It was emotional, psychological, and political. Every decision, every conversation, every whispered speculation carried weight. And as advisors and staff navigated this new reality, one truth became increasingly clear. The era of certainty within the palace had ended. The storm unleashed by the royal decree was far from over. Because while a king can issue a decree, control its enforcement, and dictate the ceremonial reshuffling of titles, he cannot control emotions. He cannot dictate loyalty. And he certainly cannot predict how a son with a global platform and a personal story to tell will respond. As the sun set over the palace, the echoes of whispered conversations, hurried footsteps, and anxious speculation lingered in the halls. The stage was set for the next chapter, and everyone inside understood one undeniable truth. The drama was only beginning. Have you ever watched the world collectively gasp? That's exactly what happened the moment the news of Harry's removal from the line of succession broke. Within seconds, headlines across the globe screamed variations of the same shocking reality. The king had erased his own son. Social media erupted, news channels went into overdrive, and ordinary citizens were suddenly embroiled in a family drama that, until now, had largely been confined to royal circles. The initial reports were rapid, chaotic, and often contradictory. British tabloids, never shy about sensationalism, published dramatic front-page spreads. Prince Harry exiled by father. The king's final word on his son. Royal rift turns permanent. Newspapers in the United States, Canada, Australia, and beyond ran similar stories, each adding its own twist to the narrative. Commentators speculated on motivations, historical precedent, and the potential fallout for both the monarchy and global opinion. Social media, as always, was a battlefield. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded with speculation, memes, and personal opinions. Supporters of the king praised his decisiveness. Charles finally put the institution first, read one viral post. Others sided with Harry, decrying the action as cruel and unprecedented. How can a father erase his own son? Influencers, pundits, and celebrities weighed in, further amplifying the story, and some even went so far as to provide expert, historical analysis, comparing Charles's actions to past monarchs' disciplinary measures. The virality of the story was fueled not just by the drama itself, but by the deeply personal nature of it. People were captivated because this was a son, publicly humiliated, or at least formally stripped of power, by his father, a king. It was relatable on a visceral level, even across cultures and continents. Family conflict, betrayal, and power struggles resonated universally. And in the age of digital media, everyone had a platform to voice their outrage, sympathy, or analysis. Meanwhile, royal correspondents scrambled to confirm the details of the decree. They contacted palace insiders, legal experts, and former royal staffers. Every sentence of the document was scrutinized for meaning, nuance, and precedent. The signing of the decree itself became a subject of intense speculation. Why now? What triggered the king to act with such finality? And crucially, what would Harry do in response? Television coverage was relentless. 24-hour news channels dedicated entire segments to analysis, featuring panels of historians, royal commentators, and psychologists. They debated the implications for the monarchy's image, the potential for public backlash, and the effect on Charles's relationship with William, who was now positioned as the future monarch under a more centralized, controlled family structure. Footage from previous royal events, smiles, handshakes, joint appearances, was replayed, now seen through the lens of betrayal and estrangement. Every glance, every gesture, every past conflict was dissected for clues about the present situation. Public opinion polls began to show a deeply divided population. Some saw Charles as a firm leader, prioritizing duty over personal feelings. Others viewed the act as unnecessarily harsh, fueling narratives of a tyrannical monarch alienating his own child. Memes and viral posts spread across social media, portraying Harry as a tragic figure caught in the crossfire of institutional tradition and paternal authority. For many, the story transcended royalty. It became a commentary on family, loyalty, and justice. Meanwhile, journalists began digging deeper into Harry's past statements, appearances, and interviews. Quotes from his various public speeches were suddenly re-evaluated. A passing remark about duty or tradition was now seen as prophetic or defiant. Meghan Markle, too, became a focal point of scrutiny. Her public appearances, social media posts, and statements were dissected for any sign of strategy, emotional response, or intent to counter the king's decree. Speculation ran rampant. Was she preparing for a media offensive? Would she release her own narrative to shape public perception? Global reaction was equally intense. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan had significant public recognition, cable news debated the cultural implications of the event. Opinion shows weighed in with perspectives ranging from admiration for Charles's decisiveness to condemnation of what some described as familial cruelty. Canadian media, reflecting H. Global reaction was equally intense. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan had significant public recognition, cable news debated the cultural implications of the event. Opinion shows weighed in with perspectives ranging from admiration for Charles's decisiveness to condemnation of what some described as familial cruelty. Canadian media, reflecting Harry's previous connections to Toronto and Vancouver, focused on his continued involvement with charitable initiatives there, questioning whether his removal would affect ongoing projects. Even in Australia and New Zealand, royal watchers dissected every element of the decree and its implications for Commonwealth ties. Meanwhile, the palace's communications team worked tirelessly to control the narrative. Carefully worded statements emphasized the king's duty to the institution, the necessity of preserving the monarchy's integrity, and the continuity of royal traditions. The language was deliberate, formal, and calculated to appeal to public respect for the crown while minimizing sympathy for Harry. But controlling the narrative in a digital, instantaneous media environment proved nearly impossible. Leaks, social media commentary, and speculative reporting spread faster than any official statement. In addition to public reaction, insiders noted a profound emotional toll within royal circles. Advisors, staffers, and friends of both Charles and Harry felt the weight of global attention. Many had grown up serving the monarchy and now witnessed an unprecedented, deeply personal rift unfold in real time. The stress was palpable. Courtiers described the palace atmosphere as tense and heavy, a stark contrast to the usual order and ceremonial calm. Meetings were conducted quietly, with hushed tones and cautious phrasing, aware that every word could be reported or misinterpreted. Meanwhile, Harry's supporters mobilized online. Campaigns, petitions, and social media movements sprang up within hours, some calling for public apologies, others for reforms in royal transparency. Hashtags trended globally, garnering millions of engagements, with comments reflecting a range of emotions: anger, sympathy, disbelief, and curiosity. Every new development, no matter how minor, became a viral sensation. The media frenzy reached a crescendo when analysts speculated about potential ripple effects on international relations. Diplomats, already accustomed to the intricacies of royal protocol, faced a new challenge: how to interact with Harry in his new, ambiguous status. Was he to be treated as a private citizen or still as a figure with influence and legacy tied to the monarchy? The ambiguity created awkwardness at official events, with aides and protocol officers scrambling to provide guidance. Yet, amid the chaos, one question loomed largest: how would Harry respond publicly? The world waited, collectively holding its breath. Would he issue a statement? Accept his new status quietly? or leverage his global platform in a way that could challenge the monarchy's authority. Every speculation fueled further media coverage, creating a feedback loop of anticipation, commentary, and public engagement. As the hours turned into days, the story evolved. New leaks surfaced, insiders shared confidential insights, and analysts continued to debate every angle. The palace remained a hub of controlled activity, but the external world was wild with conjecture, opinions, and emotion. Social media, cable news, print media, and online blogs all contributed to a narrative that was rapidly expanding and impossible to fully contain. And in the midst of this frenzy, a chilling realization emerged for the palace. The removal of a prince, however meticulously planned, cannot erase influence. Every public appearance, every statement, every charitable action by Harry would now be scrutinized as a reflection of his status outside the official monarchy. The world had a lens trained on him, and he had the power to use it in ways the king could not fully anticipate or control. The media frenzy was more than just coverage. It was a living, breathing entity that fed on the drama, amplified the emotion, and kept the story alive. And as global audiences debated, sympathized, and speculated, one thing became clear. The monarchy's relationship with Harry had entered uncharted territory. Because no decree, no royal statement, no official communication could contain the human element, the emotions, the strategies, and the potential for retaliation that lived within the prince himself. The question now was inevitable. How far would Harry go to reclaim his narrative? And could the monarchy survive the storm he was about to unleash? How could he do this? That question, whispered in disbelief, echoed through the private corridors of Harry's residence in California. The news of the royal decree had reached him hours earlier, but the reality had yet to fully settle. Stripped of his place in the line of succession, all military and charitable patronages revoked, every official connection to the monarchy severed, a king's final word, leaving no room for negotiation. And yet, as Harry sat alone in the dimly lit study of his sprawling home, he realized that the personal sting of betrayal cut deeper than any public consequence. The initial shock was visceral. Harry, who had faced intense public scrutiny throughout his life, had prepared for many forms of adversity, tabloid smear campaigns, public judgment, and even personal estrangements, but nothing quite like this. To have his father, the king, issue a decree that erased his official place in the monarchy felt like a knife twisting not just in public perception, but in family loyalty. The gravity of it pressed down on him, making each breath feel heavier. Anger followed quickly. It wasn't just about titles or privileges. It was about a father turning decisively against a son in a way that the world could witness. Friends who were with him in the immediate aftermath described him as pacing, clenching his fists, his mind racing through every interaction with his father over the past decade. Every disagreement, every perceived slight, every past comment from Charles was now filtered through the lens of this monumental action. But beneath the anger lay strategy. Harry knew that reacting impulsively could be disastrous. He was no longer protected by the traditional safeguards of royal protocol. Every statement, every movement, every public appearance could be leveraged by the media, by political observers, or even by his father's advisors to reinforce the narrative of his downfall. And yet, he also knew he could not remain silent. The world was watching, millions of eyes already glued to the story, and his response, or lack thereof, would define his legacy in the days to come. Harry immediately began assembling a trusted inner circle. His advisors, friends, and legal team were contacted one by one, summoned for a confidential strategy meeting that would determine the next steps. They discussed options ranging from measured public statements to media interviews, to more aggressive legal and diplomatic maneuvers. Every possibility carried risk, and the stakes were higher than ever. Missteps could reinforce the king's narrative. Calculated action could flip the script entirely. Friends close to Harry reported that he spent hours revisiting every public speech, interview, and social media post he had ever made. He scrutinized every word for how it could be reframed, every past action for leverage. The goal was clear: to regain control over his narrative, to assert autonomy in a situation where the monarchy had attempted to strip him of agency. The private spaces of Harry's life, his offices, libraries, and personal study became war rooms. Walls once lined with framed photographs of family moments now served as visual reminders of what had been lost. Advisors noted that he moved between reflection and planning, his emotional responses oscillating between grief and determination. It was a delicate balance. He needed to channel personal hurt into strategic action without allowing raw emotion to cloud judgment. Legal experts were consulted immediately. The decree, while absolute in its wording, could have ambiguities in enforcement and interpretation. Could certain privileges still be exercised in private capacities? Could Harry maintain informal connections with charities or regiments in ways that skirted official protocol? Advisors debated the limits of the king's authority under the laws governing the monarchy, the constitution, and historical precedent. The discussions were intense, meticulous, and conducted under strict confidentiality, understanding that leaks could compromise every strategy. In addition to legal counsel, Harry began drafting possible public statements, carefully weighing each word for tone, impact, and timing. Would he strike a conciliatory tone, appealing to the public for empathy? Or would he take a more assertive approach, criticizing the king's decision and highlighting perceived injustices? Each scenario carried potential rewards and consequences, and advisors emphasized the importance of sequencing messages strategically. Meanwhile, Harry grappled with personal relationships. Meghan, aware of the royal decree hours before the world would learn, provided counsel and emotional support. Reports from insiders suggest she encouraged a balance of dignity and assertiveness, urging Harry to protect his personal integrity while navigating the global media frenzy. Together, they discussed how the children could be shielded from the fallout, how their public lives might continue without drawing unnecessary attention, and how to maintain a semblance of family unity amid unprecedented chaos. The emotional weight of the situation extended beyond strategy. Harry experienced moments of isolation, moments when the full emotional impact of the royal decree settled in. He questioned the future of his family, the meaning of his role in public life, and even his identity outside the monarchy. Friends noted brief periods of introspection, punctuated by long silences and thoughtful gazes, suggesting that he was considering not just tactical responses, but the broader implications of this rupture on his personal life. And yet, amid the emotional turbulence, a plan began to crystallize. Harry would not remain passive. He would reclaim the narrative, assert influence in ways that did not rely on titles or official patronage, and maintain visibility in charitable and social spheres globally. Insider sources reported brainstorming sessions where media campaigns, strategic partnerships, and even memoirs were discussed, not as acts of revenge, but as tools to reassert agency in a world where the monarchy had attempted to diminish it. The response was not only strategic, but symbolic. Harry understood that his every action in the coming weeks and months would be scrutinized. Even small gestures, a public appearance, a statement of support for a charity, a personal social media post, could carry disproportionate weight. The calculus was meticulous, deliberate, and relentless. Every move was designed to communicate autonomy, dignity, and defiance without providing the king with opportunities to frame him as reckless or embittered. Family dynamics were also under intense consideration. Harry knew that William, still firmly positioned within the monarchy, was now navigating his own emotional and political balancing act. Communications between the brothers were described as sparse but intentional, focusing on shared family responsibilities and the welfare of their children. Yet tension remained palpable, as each considered the implications of Charles's decree for both their personal relationship and public perception. Even as plans were being drafted, Harry faced the unavoidable reality of media speculation. Leaks, rumors, and commentary had already begun shaping public opinion. Every narrative twist, every headline, every social media post had the potential to impact his global reputation. He and his advisors meticulously tracked sentiment, measured engagement, and evaluated potential responses in real time. And then came the first public ripple. A cryptic social media post, carefully crafted to acknowledge the situation without overtly challenging the king. Supporters immediately reacted, interpreting the subtle message as a declaration of resilience. Critics decried it as tone-deaf. The post ignited further debate, forcing media outlets to speculate about Harry's next moves and fueling global engagement. For Harry, this was the beginning of a larger campaign, a campaign not just of public perception, but of personal agency. Stripped of titles, privileges, and formal roles, he was learning to navigate the world on his own terms, leveraging influence, charisma, and global attention. And as he continued to plan, to strategize, and to prepare, one question loomed large in the minds of his advisors, the media, and the palace itself. Would he use this newfound independence to rebuild, to retaliate, or to redefine what it meant to be a prince outside the monarchy? Because one thing was certain. The king may have removed him from the line of succession, but he could not remove his voice, his reach, or the power of a narrative that was now entirely his to shape. And somewhere in the shadows, whispers of an impending public statement began circulating, one that promised to shake the foundations of the monarchy even further. Stripped of every military honor, every patronage, he's been erased from the very institutions he once championed. That was the headline that ran across British newspapers the morning after the royal decree became public. But this wasn't just a story about titles or ceremonial roles. It was a seismic shock to the institutions themselves. For decades, Prince Harry had been a beloved figure in military circles and charitable organizations, seen as a bridge between tradition and contemporary engagement. And now, overnight, that connection had been severed. Military regiments with which Harry had long-standing ties issued official statements, walking a careful line between respect for the monarchy and acknowledgement of their relationships with the prince. The household cavalry, the Blues and Royals, and the Royal Air Force volunteer units all released communiques praising his dedication and service, subtly underscoring the abruptness of his removal. Some officers privately expressed frustration and confusion. How could the king remove someone so central to morale, outreach, and ceremonial leadership? Inside the army, reactions were mixed but emotionally charged. Veterans who had served alongside Harry, especially during his tours in Afghanistan, were publicly vocal. Former comrades spoke of his bravery, leadership, and camaraderie, highlighting that his connection to military personnel was personal as much as it was symbolic. For many, the royal decree seemed not just unfair. It was a betrayal of an individual who had risked his life and championed veterans for years. Social media amplified these sentiments, with hashtags trending that celebrated Harry's military service while criticizing the king's decision. But the backlash didn't stop at military circles. Charitable organizations, those working on mental health, children's welfare, and veteran support, suddenly found themselves navigating a new reality. Harry had been a patron of over a dozen charities worldwide, each reliant on his influence and global profile to raise funds and awareness. In the immediate aftermath of the decree, some organizations released carefully worded statements, thanking him for past service while noting the official removal of his patronage. Behind closed doors, however, executives expressed concern about continuity. Major fundraising campaigns were thrown into uncertainty. Key sponsors wondered whether they could continue partnerships without the symbolic presence of the prince. The public's reaction added another layer of complexity. Outrage spread rapidly, particularly online. Memes circulated portraying the king as ruthless, highlighting the contrast between Harry's decades of service and his sudden erasure. Supporters of Harry launched social media campaigns aimed at sustaining visibility for his charitable causes, creating a new kind of grassroots momentum independent of the monarchy's official structures. Even as the palace attempted to maintain authority over the narrative, these movements illustrated a powerful truth. Influence cannot be fully controlled by titles alone. Veterans associations in the UK released coordinated statements that praised Harry's service while questioning the wisdom of the king's decree. Some pointed out the historical precedent. Few royal family members had ever been so publicly severed from their formal roles while maintaining active public engagement. Analysts noted that the decision could inadvertently weaken the crown's connection to military and charitable communities, creating a subtle but real tension between tradition and public perception. In charitable circles, the ripple effect was equally profound. Several organizations announced plans to continue working with Harry informally, bypassing official royal recognition. Insider sources revealed quiet negotiations to maintain his influence on specific initiatives, such as veterans' mental health programs and youth engagement projects. These informal arrangements, while beneficial for the causes themselves, also highlighted a new reality. Harry's public influence could now operate outside the direct control of the monarchy, creating both opportunities and conflicts. Media outlets seized on this tension immediately. Pundits debated the long-term implications. Could the king's decision backfire by isolating the monarchy from key social networks? Would Harry's independent engagement in charitable and military spheres undermine royal authority? Talk shows, podcasts, and opinion pieces dissected the decree line by line, predicting scenarios in which Harry might re-emerge as a globally recognized figure without the need for royal endorsement. Even in international military circles, reactions were brewing. Former NATO colleagues and international charity leaders noted that Harry's removal might complicate diplomatic and charitable initiatives. Some expressed concern that the king's actions could be interpreted as punitive beyond the UK's borders, potentially affecting cross-national military morale and collaborative projects. Social media amplified these concerns as veterans and charity leaders worldwide weighed in on the unfolding situation. The backlash also took a symbolic form. Photos of Harry in uniform, attending ceremonies, and engaging with troops resurfaced in news articles and online platforms, emphasizing the contrast between his service and the king's punitive action. Analysts noted the psychological impact. Young military recruits and charity volunteers who had looked up to Harry now faced confusion over how to reconcile his removal with their admiration for his work. For the palace, the backlash was a double-edged sword. On one